Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Daily Creative Challenge. My name's Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Wednesday afternoon. Or some of you, it's even Thursday, all you time travelers on that side of the world. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Manny and Selene. I think I got it that time. Lisa and Laura, Sam, great to see all of you. Aaron, awesome. So we have another Daily Creative Challenge upon us. Let's go ahead and hop over to my screen. Head on over to behance.net/challenge/XD. You can find all the information about the Daily Creative Challenge. If you haven't hit that big blue button at the top yet, definitely press it so you're notified when new challenges are available. Every single day during the first 2 weeks, you are going to receive a challenge, except that first Monday, which is the welcome stream. You can join us in our Discord community chat right over here. We have about 60,000 designers in Discord, but almost 2,000 online right now, which is incredible. You get information about the daily challenges. You can talk about design, ask questions, share tips and tricks. And if you're participating in the challenges, hop into the challenge channel, submit your work. We have some great mentors online right now. Elise and Joss and Peter and Sean. We've got some moderators, people from Adobe. It's a great community, so hop in there, have fun. Watch us live. I'm live 2 o'clock Pacific time. We also have content basically all day, which is wonderful. And then you can share your work, like I mentioned, in Discord or on Behance using the keyword XD Daily Challenge. Alrighty, so a quick recap of where we're at. Last week, we started off this process exploring how to build out a pricing table using repeat grids. We built out a sign-up form using components, financial charts using components and auto animate. On Friday, we took a look at building out a simple landing page using assets. And then we built out a nested dropdown using nested components. Yesterday, we had a lot of fun and we built out a credit card payment interaction using 3D transforms. And today we're going to be looking at using padding and stacks to build out marketing banners for your website. So go ahead and grab the starter file by pressing on Get Started. And I am going to hop over to Adobe XD, and here is the template for today. So again, we're going to be designing marketing banners you can use on your websites using padding and stacks. And if you want to watch a quick version of this video, there is a link right here you can grab, paste in your browser, and hop on over to YouTube. We got some inspiration down here. And of course, our good old artboard over here to the right. Alrighty, so we're going to get going. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the good old rectangle tool, shortcut key R. I think every design starts with a rectangle. And I'm going to draw out the banner across my artboard. I'm not too concerned about the size of this starting banner because as we start implementing padding, it's going to change, possibly very drastically. I am going to round out the corners just a little bit by grabbing on one of these handles and dragging on in. Let's try 24 pixels. That could work. And for the border, we may want to add a border, but what we're going to do first is we are going to, so Ruth is asking about the starter files getting gobbledygook. I did see a few people in Discord mention that something was going on with the starter files. It does link to, I believe, Google Drive. So if possibly you have anything blocking Google Drive, take a look at that. I will have Gus also take a look to see if there's anything that might be on our end, but I don't believe so, but we'll see. So before I start tweaking the style even more, I'm going to hop over to Finder, and I want to start by putting an image inside of this particular shape. So I do have this wonderful image of avocados with a really nice blue background, and I'm going to drag this directly into XD on the shape, and boop, there we go. And one of the reasons I love this image, not just because avocados are amazing, is because this blue area is going to work really well when we want to start adding some content on top of this banner. But I may want to add some of the content on the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side. So in the Properties Inspector, I'm simply going to flip it just like that. And I now have a nice amount of space over here to the left. Of course, I can also double click on this rectangle and adjust the mask if I need to. There we go. And that looks pretty good. We can always adjust that again later. Now, let's revisit that border for a second. Border is typically not necessary, right? I try to stay away from them, but what we can do is maybe add a white border. Let's go ahead and bump it up in size a little bit, and then maybe just drop the opacity. So it's like a very subtle bevel on our shape. And then if you want to, again, very optional, you can add a bit of a drop shadow. Depending on the style of your website, you may not want a border, you may not want a drop shadow, it may just not fit, right? I kind of like drop shadows, but very subtle drop shadows. So I'm going to bump it down on the y-axis. Let's try 24 pixels. Let's try 32 for the blur for now. And then because we're working with a greenish background, we may want to pull in some green for the shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a nice green here, maybe bump the opacity up a little bit, right? And I may want to blur it a touch more. Let's try 40 pixels. So we have a very subtle shadow, right? Just separates it from that background a little bit. All right, so we have some information. Of course, as you're adjusting your shape, the image inside of it adjusts really nicely. So let's talk about the content inside of this particular banner. Let's start off with the header. So we're going to go ahead and grab the text tool, shortcut key T, and I'm going to start by typing out, let's say, very large header. Nice placeholder text, right? Now, this is way too small. It pulled in the last style I was using on this project or another project I was working on. So we need to make some changes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first enlarge this quite a bit because it is a very large header, right? So I'm going to pull on the handle. Let's start with 40 pixels, see what that looks like. Just enter a value in on the properties inspector. And in terms of the typeface, Josephine Sands, not too bad. Let's try Museo. It's a fun typeface with a little bit of style, as you can see. And we're going to change the color to white so it's nice and readable against this blue background. We're going to make sure to left align it. Let's actually try bumping this up to 48 because it is a very large header, right? And that looks pretty good. Again, I'm not worried about spacing and padding and all that stuff. We're going to get to that in a moment. Now, right below, we may want more of a subheader. So I'm going to duplicate this downwards. I'm holding an Alt Option and dragging. This is going to be a much smaller text layer, right? Let's try 24 possibly. We'll see. And I'm going to bump the weight down to, let's try 700, and then let's type out some placeholder. Smaller header. Very yummy avocados, right? There we go. So we have a subheader now. And as you're creating all these character style or text layers, hop into your assets and just go ahead and add them as character styles. You can select both of them at once, press that plus button. That way, if you're working on several banners that use the exact same character style, you can just edit one of those text layers and it'll edit all of them, which is wonderful. Now, down below these headers, we may want some buttons, maybe a primary button and a secondary button. I'm going to grab the rectangle tool one more time, draw one out like this. And maybe for these, we're going to round out the corners completely. So I'm going to grab those handles and drag it on in. Don't need a border for that one. And on the inside of this, we may want simple text that just says something like call to action. Call to action, right? Let's make this a little bit smaller. I can drag on this handle. And I'm going to place it in the center of this particular button. Now you're noticing the text is white, the background's white, not going to work, right? So I'm going to grab the eyedropper tool, shortcut key I, and just sample one of these colors from the background. It is a little bit too large. Go ahead and hit that play button. It's not too bad. And I might want to bump this back up to 900. I'm going to center this. Let's just drop it a tiny little bit, maybe 600. See what that looks like. That's not bad. All right, I might want to make this a little bit larger, or what we can also do, we can start exploring padding on these buttons. So I am going to hop into my layers. I'm going to select both of these objects here, the text layer and that background container. And within the properties inspector, I'm going to press the plus button beside component. You can also do that inside of your assets. Plus button right down there. And we now have a component, which I'm going to call button. Now, with that done, over within the properties inspector as well, you can turn on padding. And what this is going to do is it's going to look at the relationship between the backmost layer, which is your background, and the layers above it. In this case, we just have text. We'll get into more complicated examples in just a moment. And it's going to automatically set that padding. So if I wanted to, I can just bump this to, let's say, 24 and 24, just to add a little bit more padding on the sides. You can also hold down your S key on the keyboard, and you can drag, or you can hold down S and Shift to adjust the padding all at once, right? Now, the cool thing about this is actually, let me dive in here and set the alignment of the text to left align. The cool thing about this is if you needed to change the text, the actual text layer, the background's going to automatically adjust. Now, before we do that, let's create one more state, because this is our primary button. We're going to create a new state, which I'll call outlined, and this will be our secondary button. So now if I dive in here, let's make some changes. I'm going to turn off the fill. I'm going to set a border to white. Let's make this a little bit larger. That could potentially work. And I'm going to dive in here, grab the text layer, and we'll change this to, say, secondary. And you're noticing as I'm making that change, the background, because we have padding enabled, is automatically adjusting, which is wonderful. So now we have our default state and we have our outline state. I can duplicate one over here to the right, and I'm going to switch over to my outline state. And what's cool is, even though the text layer changed and the background changed, this state still remains linked back to our main component over here to the left, which is the one with the solid diamond at the top left-hand corner. So if I did dive into this main component and change the border or the corner radius to maybe no rounded corners, it's going to also push those changes to the secondary button as well, which is wonderful. All right, that looks pretty good. And what we can do now is we can also put both these buttons into a group. So I have both of them selected. I'm going to group them, Command and Control G, and I'll call this buttons. And in the Properties Inspector, where you enabled padding just a moment ago, you can also enable a stack. And when you do that, if there are more than one layer or group or mask or whatever it is inside of that, it's going to look at the direction that those layers are laid out. In this case, it's horizontal because these buttons are going across the artboard. It's going to automatically determine that orientation, and it's going to set that padding. So now it's 16. And just like with padding, you can dive in the Properties Inspector or directly on Canvas and adjust that padding as well. But you can also, because the stack is enabled, just move these around, which is great, right? But I kind of like the way it is looking now. I'm going to go ahead actually and change this. Let's bump this up to 32 and 32. And you notice, because we edited the padding on the main component, it also edited the padding on our secondary component, or our state, right? All right, so we have some buttons, we have some text layers, things are starting to look pretty good, right? Now what we can also do is place all this information into a group as well. I'm going to call this info, and I'm going to turn on a stack. So again, just like the buttons, we can hop in there and move things around if we wanted to. We can move the buttons to the top. Don't know if that makes sense, but you can do that, right? Now, it goes further than that because you can have an overall group with padding and stacks as well. So right now we have this information group inside of this banner. But we want to make sure that if we add more information, it's going to automatically adjust as we're doing so. Now, before we get to that, we'll get to that in just a moment. We may want to actually, you know what? We're going to get to the more complicated example in just a moment. So I'm going to select all this information. So I have the background, and I also have the very large header and the info. I'm going to pop all that into a group and call this banner. And just like we did before, I'm going to turn on padding within the Properties Inspector, and it's going to automatically determine that padding based on, like I mentioned before, the group inside of it and also the background. Howard looks angry. I look angry. I'm sorry. I just have that. I have that resting face. Sorry. So as you can see here, we have a nice amount of padding on the left. We may not necessarily want that, right? So either inside of the Properties Inspector or directly on Canvas, you can hold down your S key and drag this on back, right? So let's go for 58 pixels possibly. And that looks pretty good. Now, one of the cool things is if you needed to add more content, let's say, for example, you wanted an additional header right here, maybe an additional subheader, and you duplicate this, it's going to automatically adjust that background. So I can keep doing that, and the background's going to get larger and larger and larger. This doesn't look very good. So let's go ahead and undo this. But you can do things like that. Now, there is another, more complicated example where you can get kind of creative with your background. Let me duplicate this banner down, and I'm going to turn off padding for now. And I'm going to switch over to this document over here where I have some fun illustrations that I grabbed from Adobe stock. We've got some avocados, some sushi, some sweets down here. I'm going to start with these layers at the top, these lovely avocados. And I'm going to dive into this banner here. Let's hide this one in the meantime. I'm going to paste these in. And I don't have padding enabled, so nothing's adjusting at the moment. Make this a little bit smaller. Let's position this one over to the left, somewhere around here. And maybe I'll have this leaf over here, and maybe one up here. This one will be a bit smaller. I'll rotate it a touch just to give this design a little bit of depth. Maybe I can also move this over on this side. Possibly. I don't know. We'll see. So now what we want to do is adjust this banner so that it's kind of peeking off a little bit. But we can also include this avocado illustration inside of our background. And all we have to do for that is place everything that we want to be part of the background in a group. So I'm going to select the leaf, the avocado, and also the Adobe stock image inside of that rectangle. And I'm going to group all of that, call this background, and make sure that it's at the very back of our layer stack, right? So we have background right at the back, and then we have our info. This could be in a group, this could be out of a group, as long as all the information that you want in your background is inside of a group, XD will recognize that. So we have that done, and now on the overall group, we're going to enable padding again. And we now have a nice amount of padding on the left-hand side, which is part of our background group. So again, if I dive in here and duplicate, you're going to notice the banner is getting larger. But some things, like this avocado, is not getting larger. And you may want it to get larger, right? And that's where responsive resize comes into play. So if I dive in here and select this avocado image, I can turn on manual, and right now it's set to fixed width. It's also, we might also want it maybe fixed to the top or fixed to the bottom. But as you're making these changes, definitely go ahead and, experiment. You can also adjust the manual. That looks okay there, right? Yep. And let's go ahead and not fix it to the bottom. And let's just double check something. Right, so you have your padding on this side, and as you adjust it, that is going to move. And if you add more information, let's dive in here. Maybe we'll add inside of this. And the background is adjusting, right? Let's round that out a little bit. This could be maybe a primary header or some sort of call to action at the top. I'm going to adjust the spacing a little bit. Just like that. Looks like we have a question. If you give one element in a stack a custom margin, can you then adjust the other element with a uniform margin, or is that ability broken? That's a good question. It's a complicated question for this stream. I'll definitely take a look at that afterwards. But let's create one more example. Let's move this up here. And let's go ahead and grab the rectangle one more time. This one's going to be a little bit quicker. Let's round this out. Let's go for 24 again. The background might be a nice red color for this, not the border, the background. We'll do a nice red color. We'll add another shadow. What I can do, I can actually copy this layer up here and paste it, and then just change the color. That way all those styles come over, the background or the shadow and the border as well. And then in here, we may want to put some illustrations. And remember, we do have some illustrations from Adobe stock. I'm going to grab these, pop those in place. Now, this one over here to the left, we may want completely masked inside of this shape. So what I'm going to do, we'll get to this one in a second. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to duplicate this shape, Command and Control D, place it on top of our sushi layer, Make sure both of them are selected, and then under the object menu, we're gonna go mask with shape, which will take that sushi and place it inside of this particular mask, right? And I'll call this sushi. Now we can do the same thing with this guy over here as well. We can place it in the same mask or a different mask, but this one I might want to maybe pop out just a little bit, right? Or maybe I just want it to kind of overlay like this, and maybe not have it masked at all. I think it looks kind of fun, right? Or you can place it in a mask and have some of it pop out by adjusting that mask, but I think this could work. Now I'm gonna actually go ahead and grab some of these layers. I'm gonna grab the entire info group, copy it, paste it outside. That way we can use this for our new banner. I'll change the color of that text. And this is still an instance of this main component up here. So we can continue making changes to the main component, and it'll still push those changes to all the other buttons as well. All right, that looks pretty good. And this still has a stack enabled. And now we can start enabling padding on the banner as well. But we want to make sure, just like we did before, that everything is placed into a group with the background. So I have the background, the sushi, and also the other sushi selected. Group, and call this background. And now I'm going to select that and the info group. I'll call this sushi banner. And then turn on padding one more time. And just like we did before, we can duplicate and things are going to move. Now, some things are going to move, right? Again, you may have to play around with responsive resize. So you can dive into, select this sushi right now. It's set to fixed width and fixed height. You can turn that off. Maybe you'll want it just fixed to the right-hand side. And as you would, this is another thing you have to keep in mind, right? We just dismembered our sushi. Is that if you're working with vector objects, I should have pointed that out. This is a vector, inside of this group, we have a bunch of vector objects. So when responsive resize is on, it's going to stretch those out, right? So you don't want that. So I'm going to turn responsive resize off and we'll see what happens there, right? So there's pros and cons of doing it that way. I can also, in the properties inspector, lock the width and the height. So now, duplicate, right? It'll stay in place because responsive resize is on or off in this case, right? So pros and cons of using responsive resize. Of course, if you switch to auto, you might have good success, but completely up to you how you tackle things like that. But what's cool is if you move it over here to the left or the right, your sushi is going to be moving around. His hat fell off. Yeah, the little salmon or tuna at the top definitely fell off. Let's see. So someone's asking, is it possible to build a career just by learning Adobe XD, or will you learn something more? Absolutely. A lot of companies these days are using XD for their design and websites or marketing banners like this. So absolutely. Let's see. Nailed left and right. Is there a way to make the objects masked in the editor? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Let me know. We are running out of time, but let me know quickly, and I will take a quick look. All right. So again, keep adjusting in the banner. And if you're using vector objects, which I would kind of strive away from because, I don't know, it just responsive resize sometimes does its own thing, right? But yeah, there you go. So the banner adjusts. All right, my friends, that is going to wrap it up for today. Definitely tweet me your banners. I would love to see them. Get creative with them. Hop into Discord, place your stuff in there. And, for things, you can have like stacks in stacks and padding and all that fun stuff. So up here, just very quickly, I'm going to make sure to group this. And in here, we might want to put, let's say, special deal, not dead. Make this blue, make it a little bit smaller. Let's try 14. Let's bump it down to 700. And then for this, if we did go ahead and enable padding on this group, we do have a lot of padding over to the right, but if we wanted, let's say just 24, we can easily do that. That's a bit too, let's try 12 to match. And then as we adjust this, that adjusts as well, right? All right, so for example, the avocado on the overflow hidden on the left. Still not quite sure. Send me a tweet and I'll take a look. Maybe send me some pictures as well. But that'll wrap it up for today. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in. I will be back tomorrow. We're going to wrap things up in just 2 days. So get ready. Things are going to be fun. Thanks again, everyone. And I will see you all tomorrow.